Welcome to the All Things Nintendo podcast. I'm Brian Shea, and this is a weekly podcast to discuss all the biggest news and games from the world of Nintendo. I am recording this episode a full week early since, as you are listening to this, I am either in Japan, on my way back from Japan, or just jet-lagged into infinity from being in Japan. Knowing my luck, it'll be a Nintendo Direct week, but if it does pan out the way I'm predicting, I guess next week's episode, which just so happens to be episode number 200 of this podcast, will be a big one. But for this week, it is just going to be me, and I'm going to be taking your questions and comments, as well as there's one hot take that I don't know if we're going to get to, but yeah, those will all be thrown in, and I will be doing the best job I can to answer and address them. So I got several questions and comments from both the All Things Nintendo Patreon page, as well as the Patreon exclusive Discord server. Those are the best places to get those in. But I also have a few that I picked out from Blue Sky, and then a few legacy ones that, if we have time, we will get to. So we're going to be spending the entire episode answering your questions on this episode of All Things Nintendo. But before we jump in, this show arrives in your podcast feeds completely free each and every Friday. But if you would like to support me and allow me to keep on making these episodes, you can join the Patreon page for as little as $3 a month. That gets you access to the community Discord, which gets you priority access to Q&A episodes just like this one. But there are also $5 and $10 tiers that get you access to early and ad-free episodes, plus shout-outs at the end of every show. So you can help out by just going to patreon.com and searching All Things Nintendo, or you can go to patreon.com/Brian Shea Podcasts. It would also really help the show if you were able to just subscribe to my YouTube channel. That is a completely free way to support this podcast. And if none of that works for you, then just tell a friend. And speaking of free ways to support the show, I am now posting short clips from this podcast on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. So I actually made a standalone Instagram account, which is at All Things Nintendo Podcast. And my YouTube and TikTok are the same name as I have on Blue Sky and my personal Instagram, which is at Brian P. Shea. So you'll be able to find short clips. I'm trying to pull out an episode or a one clip per episode, or most episodes anyway. But sometimes time permitting, I'm not able to get to it. But yeah, there's lots of ways you can support the show. The preferred way is obviously the Patreon, but if that's not in the cards, you don't have the budget to help out with that, then there are several free ways that you can help out the podcast. But yeah, without much further ado, let's get to some of your questions here. Let's start with Andy over on Discord. They wrote, "How much did you upgrade your storage, and what do you recommend?" So here's the first piece of storage that I actually got. If you're watching the video version, I had a 256 gigabyte micro SD Express. It's not focusing on it, but whatever. You get the point. You've seen a micro SD card before. I quickly realized, and I only got that because I couldn't get the bigger one. And I quickly realized that is not going to be anywhere near enough for me. So I was hoping to land a 512 gigabytes, and that ended up not being in the cards. So there was, I guess Walmart had it in stock around the time that I had this 256. And every time I went to go check out, it sold out immediately. Like these micro SD Express cards are extremely difficult to get your hands on in the larger quantities. So I started monitoring Wario64, who, if you don't follow him on social media and you're into like video game deals and difficult to find things coming in and out of stock, he is a must follow, really. And and he posted out that Amazon actually had a 1 terabyte micro SD Express card. And remember, for Switch 2, it needs to be Express. If it's micro SD XC or micro SD, I think Mini is the other one, or just a regular micro SD card, I think it can only store your captures. It can't store any games at all, which is upsetting because your options are extremely limited. But anyway, he shared that Amazon had a 1 terabyte from Lexar, and I ordered it, and it was like it'll arrive in mid-July. And I was like, oh, perfect. I'm going to Tokyo. So I will have a 13-hour flight. I'll be able to load up my Switch 2 with all the games that just wouldn't fit. The 256 filled up immediately. I downloaded basically Cyberpunk, Street Fighter 6, and a few other games, and that filled up my 256 card. So the 1 terabyte, once you get those like Street Fighter 6s and Cyberpunk 2077s out of the way, it it's perfect because like a lot of the indie games and a lot of the first party Nintendo games are extraordinarily small. So you don't have to worry about them taking up too much space. I was able to download pretty much every game that I have. And I mean, I have so many games, and I download pretty much every game that I have that I wanted to have on my Switch 2. So, like, games that I've beaten that I wasn't really a fan of, or games that I started and I didn't really like, or games that I recently beat that I don't plan on revisiting anytime soon and don't really have the replay value. I didn't download those, but games that, like, oh, maybe I'll be in the mood to really play this one specific game. I have it on there, and I still have like 100 gigabytes to spare. So that's even like my most ambitious, downloading everything that I could possibly want. It is great. I mean, I think it's 256 gigabytes that are in the internal storage, so that certainly helps. But I know that I was struggling to have everything that I want. Like Sonic X Shadow Generations was on the sidelines for me. Not anymore. Now I have all those games downloaded on my Switch 2, and I I'm really enjoying having this giant memory card full of so many amazing Switch games and indie games and whatever. So I think that most people could probably get by with a 512. And if you're just playing like the indie games, you say you have a PlayStation 5 and an Xbox Series X for games like Street Fighter 6 and Hitman and Cyberpunk 2077 and Sonic X Shadow Generations, the games that take like upwards of 50 gigabytes on Switch 2. If you play those on PlayStation 5 and you're just going to have your Switch 2 be for like Nintendo games and say you like having like Dead Cells and Hades and Balatro on the go, I mean, you could get away with a 256 gigabyte, but if you want some of those bigger third-party titles, like I would imagine some of the sports games, like some of the EA Sports titles and like NBA 2K, I bet those are going to be pretty massive file sizes. If you're wanting to have any of these multi-platform games, that's when you really have to start considering the 512s and the 1 terabyte. The 1 terabyte set me back $183, so they're pretty pricey, and I don't see them coming down until more manufacturers get in the market. Because right now it's pretty much cornered. Like there's a few that do 512, but I've only been able to find Lexar that does the 1 terabyte, and it seems to work. Like I was able to fire it up. I will say that it does seem like it's slightly slower than the 256 gig that I had, but I don't know if that's just because there is so much space on it that it takes a while to read everything that's on it, and I have so many games on it. Because I'll fire up my like all games, like if you scroll all the way to the right on your Switch 2 home screen, you can go into like see your entire library. I noticed that it takes like I want to say like 2 or 3 seconds, so nothing substantial, nothing alarming, but like they all show up as gray squares, all the ones that are on the 1 terabyte Lexar that I got, and then eventually they do populate, but it does take a second to show up, and that was something that I didn't expect because these express cards are supposed to be extremely fast. And again, I don't know if that's just because it's 1 terabyte, so it has a lot of data to sift through, but yeah, that is kind of the only downside that I'm seeing so far, aside from the price. So if you want to like really go whole hog, go all in, the 1 terabyte's the way to go. I think that most people will be fine with a 512, at least for now, until like most multi-platform games start coming to Switch 2. Like then it's going to be a problem, I think. Thank you so much, Andy, for that question. We go over to Firamar. Sorry if I'm butchering that, on Patreon. They say, hey, Brian, I finally got my first physical print of the new era of Game Informer magazine. Oh, thank you so much. I'm glad you guys decided to keep the magazine number. I'm glad you guys decided to keep the magazine number. As for my question, personally, when I see the Switch 2 version of third-party games, I only notice slight differences in graphics when compared side by side to their PS5 and Xbox Series X counterparts. Do you think the average gamer would be able to see the PS5 version of a game on one TV and then go to someone else's house who's playing the Switch 2 version on another and say, this doesn't look as good? Have you personally had that experience yet, or do you know someone who has? Um, I don't know someone who has. I've noticed it a little bit. Like Sonic X Shadow Generations is one that I mentioned where it looks good, and I don't think it looks noticeably worse on Switch 2. But as somebody who beat it on PlayStation 5 and has played a little bit of it on Switch 2, it is. I can tell that it's a slight downgrade. And I would say the same thing for Cyberpunk 2077. Street Fighter 6 looks great, but it is, I think there's slightly fewer particle effects. Um, I don't think the average gamer will notice too much. Maybe some of the more graphically intense games, it might be more noticeable. I don't know what game that might be. Like maybe if maybe Sonic. I mean, it's a Switch One game, so this is kind of cheating. But like Sonic Frontiers, I would imagine it will be pretty noticeable if that game is. I haven't fired it up. I did download it as part of my recent download spree when I got my 1 terabyte. But I downloaded it with the express reason of checking out how much better it is on Switch 2. I would imagine it's somewhat better, but probably because it is a Switch 1 game still, I would bet it's still pretty far behind the PS5 and Xbox Series X version. But like for specific Switch 2 games, I don't think that the difference is going to be all that noticeable on like a Switch 2 versus a PS5. Maybe if there was a game like Grand Theft Auto 6, I don't think that's going to come to Switch 2, at least not at launch. But I would bet that a extremely graphically intense game such as that would be noticeable. I heard The Witcher 3, like the upgrade that The Witcher 3 got was incredible. I heard that it runs fantastic. It could still use a little bit of optimization specifically for the Switch 2, but it sounds like the Switch 1 version is running really, really well, The Witcher 3, over on the Switch 2. So I don't think the average person will notice too many differences playing Switch 2 versions of games as opposed to like PS5 or Xbox Series X. But those with trained eyes, I think, certainly will. Going over to Discord again, we're going to go to Darth Platypus on Discord. They say, if you could have a collector's edition of any video game, what would it have been, and what would you want included in that collector's edition? Oh, man. What game would I have wanted a collector's edition for? See, the thing is a lot of them now do come with collector's editions. Looking around at my cover stories, I mean, despite it being my favorite game of all time, I never got the Breath of the Wild collector's edition. I did, if you're watching the video version, I did get the Master Sword light or lamp that at the Nintendo store in San Francisco, that it somewhat resembles the Breath of the Wild collector's edition standee. That said, it's hardly an identical thing, but that's one of the main reasons I got it, is because I didn't have the dilapidated Master Sword from Breath of the Wild in the pedestal. I would have like, if I could go back in time, I guess, to any game, like an Ocarina of Time collector's edition would be so cool. Like they could do so many like amazing things, like having the stones that you collect, having an ocarina. I mean, I do have an ocarina that I got that's modeled after the Ocarina of Time. Maybe some of those older Sonic games. What would I want in those? The easy choice, I think, would be like one of the older Pokemon games, and have it come with like a Pokeball or something like that, or like the badges, like the gym badges. That would be such a cool collector's edition. But of course, like, not even Game Freak or the Pokemon Company or Nintendo knew that Pokemon was going to be the phenomenon that it would become, and like, the level of success that it has obtained. But like, if I could go back in time and tell Game Freak, Pokemon Company, and Nintendo and Creatures that Pokemon Red and Blue was going to take the world by storm, and they should capitalize with a like $150 collector's edition, which, you know, was a lot rarer back in 1998. But if I could do that, and they could take that information from the future and implement that into a collector's edition, having something like, you know, maybe a special edition Pokemon card, a replica Pokeball, and maybe like replica gym badges as either like pins or medallions or something, that would be probably like a dream come true for me. I still love like having like the replica Pokeballs, and, you know, I have like the Premier Ball and like those really heavy duty ones. I forget who makes them, but like those are so cool. And I think that as an 11-year-old getting into Pokemon back in 1998, I would have lost my mind if that was like a collector's edition. I already had to beg my parents for getting a Game Boy Color and Pokemon Blue for Christmas, and then eventually saving like my allowance and like chore reward money in order to get Pokemon Yellow shortly thereafter. But I think I would have probably gone into overdrive trying to get money so I could buy like the ultra premium Pokemon Red, Blue, Yellow collector's edition if it was something like that. Next up, we have AgroKrog on Discord. They write, what are your top 3 ports of games that skipped the Switch 1? Okay, so top 3 ports of games that skipped the Switch 1. I'm trying to make sure I'm interpreting this question correctly. So, games that were ported to other platforms but not Switch 1? Man, a lot of games came to Switch 1. That's the problem. Looking around again at like my cover stories, but ports of games that skipped Switch 1. I mean, maybe just games that skipped Switch 1 in general. Let's just go with that. Top 3 games. I'll just say like in the recent few years. That's how I'll do this. Because maybe how about we do it like this? Multi-platform games that came out in the lifespan of the Switch 1 that did not come to Switch 1. Let's go with that. Top 3 games. I mean, I would love to have Clair Obscur on there, but that is certainly going to have to be on the Switch 2. But that's up there with like Persona 5 in terms of games that like I think would be perfect fits. We'll say Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth. I think that those games are phenomenal reinterpretations of the Final Fantasy VII formula, and to have that on the go would be so cool. And it wasn't on Switch 1, so I think that counts. Prior to Switch 2, I probably would have said Street Fighter 6 is one that like I think that's one of my favorite Street Fighter games, if not now my favorite Street Fighter game. It's probably just behind like Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. But now that's on Switch 2, so that's awesome. Man. Top 3 games that skipped the Switch 1. I mean, Metaphor ReFantazio is a great example, like, or Persona 3 Reload. Those are all games. None of these are like my top game. I mean, you could just say Pokemon Red and Blue because they, for whatever reason, have not been put out on either the eShop or Nintendo Switch Online. Makes absolutely no sense. Twilight Princess HD, Wind Waker HD, the Mass Effect Legendary Collection, like the Mass Effect trilogy. That's one of my favorite. I mean, it might be my favorite trilogy of all time, but like Mass Effect 2 in particular is a top 10 game of all time for me. So I'd probably say like I don't have like a strict top 3, but those good starting points right there. So yeah, let's go with those. Wham Bam Sam the Gaming Man over on Patreon says, "Hi Brian, because of you I decided to check out Marvel Strike Force. It got its hooks into me and I check it out on a daily basis now. Obviously, you've been playing it for a while. Who's your highest CP hero? This and Marvel Snap are my main mobile games I play. I jumped off Pokemon trading card game Pocket pretty quickly. So let's start with that. I played Marvel Strike Force for over 8 years. I literally played it at Game Developers Conference right before it launched. And I think 2 or 3 months later, it came out, and I downloaded it day one, and I played it every single day. I think I missed one day because I was on a cruise ship that did not have internet, and I just had no way of playing it. That's the one day I missed in 8 years, just to give you an idea of like the level of commitment that I had there. Uh, I got fed up finally. Marvel Strike Force was my daily player for over 8 years, and I finally just could not take it anymore. They Scopely does a lot of really great things with that game, but it also it has to, because it's such a gotcha heavy game, it has to feed the we're going to put out a new hero. Like, I think it's like every week, basically they want to put out a new hero for you to recruit. And unfortunately, I know that like the team that is responsible for fixing bugs and the team that's responsible for other aspects of the game are not necessarily the team that is balancing the game and like putting these new heroes in and designing them and everything. But it felt like they were prioritizing putting in these new characters rather than actually fixing some of the problems. And they kept making changes that nobody asked for. They kept the former All Things Gamers guest, Mobile Gamer 365. He's brought up several times on his channel that they utilize a thing called frustration marketing. And it's a thing that a lot of developers that try to monetize, like a lot of free to play developers in particular, utilize, where they want you to be frustrated enough with the game that you drop money on it to ease that frustration, but not frustrated enough to quit the game. And I put up with a lot of nonsense from Marvel Strike Force over the course of those 8 years, but it just got to a point where I could not tolerate it anymore. I was tired of feeling perpetually frustrated. I went from spending a decent amount of money back in like, probably between like 2018 and 2021. I spent a decent amount of money. Then I went completely free to play because I was unsatisfied with the direction of the game. And then it turned back to, okay, they're doing some good stuff. I feel comfortable giving a little bit of money back to this game. And then it nosedived pretty immediately. And I've heard they're doing some cool stuff, and maybe I would check it out again at some point. But like, I just feel like it was such a time sink. The developers, maybe at the direction of the corporate overlords, were, I don't think they were respectful of players' time. They weren't respectful of players' wallets, that's for sure. And it just led to this feeling of always being on a hamster wheel, never being able to reach the carrot. And the rare time you could reach the carrot, it was super late. Like, they have this thing called Dark Dimension, which is end game content. And it was always just like, unless you dropped an ungodly amount of money, you were finally able to get this character that you unlocked. Like in the case of the two most recent ones that I completed, the rewards were Mephisto and then later Odin. And it was like, all right, Odin is finally out, and I don't have Mephisto because I'm so far behind like the top tier players. And I know they have to have content to satisfy the whales that spend so much money on these games. But it just felt like I was always behind. I was always being left in the dust, even though I was such a devoted player. And they started making it all too evident that even being a devoted player, even playing multiple hours every day, as I was, you couldn't accomplish everything you wanted to accomplish. And that was when I got really frustrated, because I think that free to play games, if they want to monetize it, like, if they don't want to just do like, all right, well, you're out of lives, so you have to come back tomorrow or wait for your lives to recharge today. The way to do that in the best possible way, I think, is to make it so like, yes, you can alleviate the grind that you have to do in order to achieve the goals here. But if you really want to spend like all these hours and all like this, like come back on like whatever your cooldown is, you can still accomplish everything. They made it so that you had to spend money in order to start to hit like the later goals and milestones. And then combine that with like just making really player unfriendly moves. I did eventually fall off. The only thing I do now on my phone is Clash Royale, which I've had problems with that in the past as well. But I found that if I mute the emotes, I don't get nearly as frustrated. It used to be so frustrating to me when it first came out, where people would like taunt you and troll you and everything. There's still some of that they can do through gameplay, but as long as you turn off the emotes, there's no interactions between the player and you, right? Like it's not them just being total jerks and total trolls and rage baiting you. The only thing they can do is do some like kind of unfriendly tactics, but like you, as long as you have an appropriate deck, you can counteract that. So that's the only mobile game I'm playing now, aside from occasionally Balatro when I'm traveling. Um, but yeah, my highest combat power character, I think, when I stopped playing was Mephisto, but I'm not entirely sure about that. I know I pumped a ton of resources into him. I'm sorry that I don't I don't play anymore. Again, maybe one day I'll go back, and if I do and you're still playing, maybe I'll join your alliance, because I'm pretty sure my alliance kicked me out even though I was a captain. But I let them know that I was going to quit. And I tried to cancel my account with Scopely, and they made me like submit all of this information to make them delete my account. And I basically was like, this isn't worth it. I can just let it be like a ghost ship floating rudderless out into the middle of the night. I don't care. Like, whatever. Maybe that'll even enable me to come back and not have to start from scratch. But yeah, so sorry for going on a rant there, but like that, yeah, that's kind of how I fell off of Marvel Strike Force. I hope you're enjoying it though. I hope that they have eased a lot of the frustrations that were caused me to quit, but it just seemed like a pattern. It seemed like almost like an abusive relationship between the players and Scopely at a certain point. And you know, I just felt like I had to stop playing. I just couldn't, in good conscience, continue to support it. Wham Bam Sam the Gaming Man also says, I also recently started playing Prado Tower. If you haven't heard of it, it's a fantasy RPG that gets you out walking in the real world. This is the actual description. Prado Tower is a fantasy RPG that uses your daily steps to power your character. Pick a deck and collect enough steps to reveal cards and continue your adventure. Traverse monsters, dungeons, and event cards. Traverse cities and dungeons. Forage for resources and battle monsters as you walk. And then Wham Bam Sam the Game Man says, it's a cool game, and if you're on your feet a lot, you can just leave your phone in your pocket all day and do some battles in the evening. All right, well, there you have it. If you want to check that game out, that sounds like a good alternative to Pokemon Go. It sounds like you don't have to have your phone out with you when you're walking like Pokemon Go requires. So, you know, I liked Pokemon Go when I was playing it. This sounds like a much more passive thing that you can just kind of collect your steps without having to have your phone out. And then you can, when you get home, see how many steps you collected to traverse this game. They say it's a cool game, and if you're on your feet, okay, I already read that. Cheers, Brian. P.S. I got a GI digital subscription. Love issue 1, and it looks awesome too. Thank you so much. Yeah, anybody who supports Game Informer, I really, really appreciate it. You know, this is an all new era for us. We had to start from scratch. Basically, we didn't get any of the subscribers. We didn't get any of like the email lists that our prior parent company had. So if you have supported Game Informer, whether through digital or physical, like, thank you so much. It really means a lot to us. It's helping us continue doing what we're doing over there. We got this from Bucket Hat Matt over on Discord. Matt writes, I just finished the book Console Wars. Fantastic book. Do you think there was real belief in the gaming community that Sega was going to overtake Nintendo by the late 90s? Did you prefer Sonic games to early Mario games? I think there were certain people who thought that Sega could overtake Mario. You know, Nintendo was the leader all throughout the mid to late 80s, right? And then Sega kind of came on as the new kid on the block, and they really did what no other rival to Nintendo could do, and that was they pretty much, you know, punched Nintendo in the mouth, right? They had this new character, Sonic, who could like really rival Mario in the sense that it's a platform mascot, and the graphics were better than NES Mario games. It was faster. It really made Mario look slow. Even Mario 3, which I think is a better platformer than any of the Sonic games. If you were in the 90s and like graphics were a much more important thing back then, it really did. Like the speed at which Sonic could go made Mario look extremely slow, even though, like, Mario just is a tighter game. The levels are much better designed, but there was something magic about what Sonic was doing in those early 90s outings. I would say from Sonic 1 through Sonic and Knuckles. So that's Sonic 1, Sonic 2, Sonic CD, Sonic 3, and Sonic and Knuckles. Those games were just lightning in a bottle. I don't know if it was ever realistic that Sonic was going to or Sega was going to overtake Nintendo, but there was a period where Sega was selling better than Nintendo. Unfortunately for Sega, the Super NES came out shortly after Sonic arrived in the Genesis, and the Super NES did have its fair share of backlash because a lot of parents back then did not understand console life cycles. So they were very resistant to getting a Super Nintendo because they were like, well, we got a Nintendo. Why do we need a Super Nintendo? They're just trying to price gouge us. And they're trying to get us so that we have to pay to upgrade our Nintendo consoles. What does this do that our NES can't do? They didn't understand like graphics chips and RAM and all that type of stuff. So they thought it was a scam. They thought it was planned obsolescence, which to an extent any console is planned obsolescence because eventually you're going to have to move on to a new console, and they're not going to keep putting out games for old consoles. So there was a period where Sega was selling really, really well, and like, they had the better version of Mortal Kombat, and that was a big deal. And they had the better versions of the EA Sports games. So I think that like there was this momentum that Sega had. And if you want to, a good to Bucket Hat Matt, a good companion piece to this, by the way, would be to go and listen to my episode that I did with Blake J. Harris, the author of Console Wars. If you haven't listened to that, that is absolutely, I mean, he basically, if you read that book, you understand he's a historian on the Sega Nintendo rivalry. And obviously I talked to him about 10 years after he put out this book. So, it wasn't the freshest on his mind, but I the only Sonic game that I would say rivaled the Mario games in terms of quality for me and in terms of how much I loved it was Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Today I can look back and say Super Mario World is a better game, but when you consider the graphics, when you consider what Sonic 3 and Knuckles was able to accomplish, and when you consider the attitude that Sonic had and like the multiple playable characters, you could play as Sonic and Tails, Knuckles. It was so amazing and mind-blowing for me as a kid. At that point I was 7, 8 years old playing these games, and I lost so many hours just replaying Sonic 3 and Knuckles over and over again. But that said, I think overall I preferred Mario. I played Mario World on repeat. I liked Super Mario Brothers 3. I still think Mario World is my favorite 2D Mario game. But I played a lot of Mario 1, Mario 2. Mario Kart was better than anything that Sonic was doing in terms of like the racing games. Like we had Sonic R that I never was really that big of a fan of, aside from like it looked cool. So yeah, I mean, I don't think Sega was ever going to realistically overtake Nintendo. If you listen to the Console Wars episode that I did with Blake J. Harris, I think that there was a moment in time where Sega was doing everything right. Nintendo was kind of struggling a little bit, but Nintendo quickly kind of regained its footing, and it seemed like just kind of like a fleeting flash in the pan where Sega was kind of on top of the world, and then very quickly they were not. And after the Genesis, Sega really never regained its footing. The Sega CD didn't sell as well. The 32X was an absolute flop. The Saturn was a flop, and especially accentuated by the fact that they made Sega the Sega Saturn launch surprised nobody. Like, they basically surprise launched it, and they didn't have any of the retail space. Um, and then the Dreamcast, fantastic console, amazing library of games, but it just could not keep up with the PlayStation 2. So it was discontinued, and Sega ultimately ended up exiting the console space. But yeah, to answer your question, I do think that there was a brief period where people thought Sega might overtake Nintendo. But also, you have to keep in mind, Nintendo had a lot of monopolistic practices back then, where they were pressuring retailers to not stock Sega games on their shelves, or Sega consoles on their shelves. And if they did, they had to devote just a tiny little space to it. And if they didn't just follow that rule, they were going to refuse to send them stock for their games. Or there were also stories of them buying up all of like the graphics chips, so Sega couldn't have enough games manufactured for like the holiday season. So that also contributed to the fact, and that's why Tom Kalinske, who was the president of Sega of America at the time, he is really to credit for the plan of attack that they took to Nintendo. And doing the Genesis does what Nintendo don't. They did the edgy marketing that Nintendo just was fully unprepared for, because it was very, respect based, and like you have to maintain decorum. And really, I would also say that Donkey Kong Country was a huge step in swinging the momentum back in Nintendo's favor, outside of, the 32X and the Saturn absolutely flopping. So yeah. Nintendo 101 on Discord. If you couldn't have your current career, what could a couple of careers be that would interest you? Oh man. Well, I remember when I was a kid, I wanted to be a baseball player. I loved playing baseball. I was a shortstop growing up. I was pretty good. I was a really good fielder, an okay batter. Um, I that was just kind of like a dream. I wanted to be a sports reporter before I was a writer about video games, and even before writing about video games, I wrote about music. So I even though I kind of hated writing growing up, I think that what happens is, the school system kind of made me write about things I wasn't interested in. And it's the same thing about like a lot of the books they make you read, right? Like it kind of trained me to think that I didn't like reading. It kind of trained me to think I didn't like writing. And I learned in fourth grade when my teacher said, you can write a biography about anybody. One has to be a person one has to be a famous person. So I got to write about my grandfather, and then I got to write a biography about Cal Ripken Jr., who's my favorite athlete ever. And that was when a light bulb kind of went off in my head of like, oh, I kind of like this writing thing. Like, if it's a topic that I enjoy, I kind of like it. And before that, I had also written for my elementary school's newspaper, writing about sports. But that wasn't any kind of real structured thing. That was just kind of, I could write whatever I wanted to, and I would do like weird, like little abstract things where I would have people vote in, like who is the all-star team that you'd want to see in baseball or NBA or football or whatever. And people could like do that, but like that wasn't like actual articles or anything. Aside from my first interview ever was with a Frederick Keys player, which at the time was a single A affiliate of the Baltimore Orioles, but they were my hometown minor league baseball team, and I interviewed one of the pitchers. So that was like my first interview I ever did, and I loved that. I thought that was the coolest thing ever. But it was in third grade, so like my questions were I would say not up to the standards that I have now for myself when I do interviews about video games. So like different reporters, different journalism, different media, that type of stuff. When Game Informer was shut down, I kind of had to reckon with this question myself, right? Where I was like, all right, well, I think my time as a member of games media is over. So I started thinking about like, what else would I want to do? I dabbled in doing some like ghost writing for a tech company. I did some consulting work. So basically, like developers would send me early builds of their games. I would play them and basically write a review similar to what I would have done at Game Informer, but a lot more in depth. Like basically like a review, but report for some of these developers and telling them what was and was not working for these games. So, I mean, the games that I did that for were Funko Fusion, Maximum Football, and Hello Kitty Island Adventure for Switch. So I did that, but also I was looking at like PR roles and community management roles, and it's really hard to get a job in the games industry these days. We've talked a lot on this podcast about how the layoffs are making it really a hostile field to either try to maintain stability or get into in general. And I found that out firsthand. So like I was actually having to wrestle with the idea of leaving the games industry altogether. So I was looking at like content creation at like various corporations. I'm lucky enough that I live in the Twin Cities, and I think the Twin Cities metropolitan area is the most concentrated in Fortune 500 companies. So I was applying to jobs like that. I was applying to like different like social media jobs at various companies. So those were the types of things I was interviewing for, being a publicist. But I loved continuing to do this podcast. If worse came to worse and I really had to like do it myself, go my own way because like the job market is rough, I probably would have expanded this podcast even more than I did during my unemployment when I had the extra Patreon podcast that I did every week. I probably would have done maybe 3 or 4 shows a week, just covering different topics, and try to continue building the Patreon page, which it is proving difficult. Like candidly, I have had to look at like the all things Nintendo and look at like the Patreon numbers, and it's lower than I want it to be. So I'm trying to really put in the work to grow the podcast. But when you work full time and travel as much as I do for my job, like it is difficult to devote that much time to it. So I am trying to continue to grow the podcast. But yeah, if I wasn't in my current career, like, if I really hope this doesn't happen because I love my job, but if for whatever reason it fell apart again sometime in hopefully the distant future, I would probably look at either going dev side, or I would probably leave the industry altogether. Also, I did register a domain, and I dabbled with the idea of starting my own written outlet outside of any kind of established thing. But when Game Informer came back, I put that on the back burner. And then Nintendo 101 follows up with your top 3 multiplayer games ever created on Nintendo platforms. Probably Splatoon. I mean, I'd probably put the most time into Splatoon 1, but if I'm honest, Splatoon 3 is the best one by a pretty substantial margin. What else? Mario Kart World, I would say. Knockout Tour is so much fun. If you joined us for the community night, you understand how much fun that can truly be. We had such a good time. I was actually considering trying to find a date in August to do that all over again. Just another Mario Kart World. Hopefully more people in the Patreon and Discord server will have Mario Kart World and a Switch 2, so we could do like even more people. Hopefully by then Nintendo figures out game chat and we can invite people after the party has been created, because that is such a wild limitation that Xbox figured out almost 20 years ago at this point. Other multiplayer games on Nintendo. Nintendo has never really been a destination for me for multiplayer games, but Mario Kart World, Splatoon, I don't know which one. Probably Wii Sports, actually. Yeah, Wii Sports, just playing that with friends. I don't know if that ever got old, aside from the fact that we all just moved on to different things. Yeah, just a terrific local multiplayer experience. Avery Moore over on Patreon says, "Hey Brian, Ave here again. Been a while since I asked a question. I have 2 for this one. If you had to pick, what would you say your favorite Pokemon is? All right, let me answer that one first. Dragonite. I love Dragonite. I always liked him. He was always kind of one of the ultimate goals for me when I was playing the Gen 1 games. And I believe you can get him in Gen 2 as well. But it was Pokemon Go that really like finalized him as my favorite Pokemon. And I love that he's just like, it's Dratini and Dragonair, and then for some reason this big anime dragon. And I'm so happy that Pokemon Legends Arceus or Pokemon Legends ZA is going to give him a Mega Evolved form, even though I'm not a big fan of what he looks like, but it's a super powerful version of Dragonite, and it seems like it's going to play a decently sized role in Pokemon Legends ZA. So I'm excited for that. Avery goes on to say, what's your favorite Donkey Kong game? Could be a 3D one like DK64 or Bonanza, or a 2D one like Donkey Kong Country. Thanks for everything you do. ATN is probably one of my favorite podcasts / shows to listen to and watch. Thank you so much. I really hope that people enjoy the show. Really, like it's something, it's a labor of love, but it's also something I put a lot of work into. So thank you so much. Comments like that really mean a lot. My favorite Donkey Kong game. I'm going to say up until now, it probably would have been Donkey Kong Country 1. And I've said it so many times, it was how I bonded with my it was one of the ways. I'm not going to say it's the only way, but it's one of the ways I bonded with my dad growing up. And for that, it's always going to have a special place in my heart. And I also think it's a terrific game. And going back to that discussion on graphics, it was unlike anything we'd ever seen at that point. And to continue plugging old episodes of this podcast, if you want a really cool discussion about how that game came to be and like the graphical improvements and the design of the characters, go listen to my episode with Kev Bayless, who was the art director of the Donkey Kong Country franchise with Rare back in the 90s. He was also the creator of Diddy Kong, and he was responsible for the redesign of Donkey Kong. I think Donkey Kong Bonanza might overtake that. And it's not because of sentimental value. Like, I don't think anything's going to overtake Donkey Kong Country 1 in terms of sentimentality for me. But Bonanza just feels like such an incredible and complete package and experience that I'm not done with it yet. I probably finished it on the flight to Japan, but it is just an incredible, incredible game. And I'm having such a blast playing Donkey Kong Bonanza, destroying everything in my path and exploring the exploration. I mean, I've often talked about how Breath of the Wild, the exploration is my favorite part of my favorite game ever. And Donkey Kong Bonanza reminds me of like that level of exploration. I mean, the environments are a lot smaller than Breath of the Wild. I know there's a ton of different environments, but I think that Bonanza captures kind of that magic that Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom had. And I love a lot of what they're doing with that. So yeah. Let me grab a drink of water here real quick. KC over on Discord says, some Sega focus here. What are your levels of excitement for Shinobi Art of Vengeance and Sonic Racing Crossworlds? Very high. Shinobi Art of Vengeance, I think that's going to be one of my favorite games of this year. I've played, probably 30 to 45 minutes of that game. And even though it was like an early level and then like kind of like a slightly later but still fairly early level, I came away so high on that. I think that game is going to be absolutely incredible, and I can't wait. We're only a month away now. That it feels like such an incredible action game. Like there's so many different moves you can pull off in that, and really it feels like a great modernization of the Shinobi series, but also branching off in something completely different, like the 2D action platformer emphasis with a little bit of Metroidvania dropped in, all kinds of different combos and moves you can mix in. It is doing so many cool things. I'm ecstatic for the opportunity to play the full version of that. And Sonic Racing Crossworlds, I think that game looks like it's kind of carving its own identity. It's carving its own niche. It's more of a traditional kart racer as opposed to Mario Kart World, which is doing some cool stuff with the free roam and open world nature of that. Driving between courses is a cool twist on that formula. Sonic Racing Crossworlds is doing some cool stuff. And this actually segues perfectly into the second part of this question, which is regarding Crossworlds, how do you think it'll fare against Mario Kart World, considering it seems to be taking more of a traditional approach to kart racing? Yes, that is exactly what I was saying. It's doing some really neat things with that, right? Like it is taking the kart racing elements and making it more like Sonic and All Stars Racing Transformed, and taking that forward, and also making it so that there's like elements from all the different eras of the Sonic racers, right? There's stuff from Sonic Air Riders, Sonic Riders, and there's also elements from Sonic and Racing All Stars Transformed, and there's all these different characters from all across. I mean, there's crossover characters which I'm not necessarily stoked on, but they all bring distinct elements to this kart racing experience. And then there's the Crossworlds element of it, which is basically like the lead racer has two rings appear in front of them after the first lap, and they get to choose which level they go to for lap 2, and these are all intricate levels. So there are so many variables that are being thrown in there. I mean, the weapons are never going to be as iconic as Mario Kart, nor will just the kart racing in general. If you are a Mario Kart player, if you're a casual player, Sonic Racing Crossworlds is not going to be ever as iconic as Mario Kart World, right? Like Mario Kart is always going to be the clubhouse leader, and nothing is ever going to compete with it, at least in the foreseeable future. Sonic Racing Crossworlds could be an incredibly strong racer, but it's going to be in the shadow of Mario Kart World, unfortunately. But that said, it's doing a lot of things right in the eyes of like marketing, right? There's going to be Nickelodeon crossover content, Minecraft, Persona, Yakuza crossover content. They are making it so that like, you know, it's probably not going to be $80, which is another big thing. It's multi-platform, it's cross-play. All of these things are smart moves by Sega. And not to mention, you know, in addition to having all of the crossover content, they have a lot of customization that you can mix in. They have a lot of iconic characters from the Sonic franchise that you can play as. So there's a lot of really great things that the Sonic Racing Crossworlds is doing. Next up, we have Three Swords Sama over on Discord. They write, "What's a trend, either in Nintendo or in general, that you would like that you like? Sorry, and what's something that Nintendo has been doing lately that they could improve? Something they could improve. I think that having having their online stuff just work better, right? They're taking strides, but I've complained about it before. I complained about it earlier on in this episode that Nintendo needs to address the game chat functionality of being able to add new people after you have already started the party. I think that's just such basic functionality. Also, they tend to have a problem with lobby systems that they could do better job with. Just online play in general could be done better. What's a trend either in Nintendo or in general that I like? I like this we're bringing more games to more platforms, right? Xbox, for all the problems that I have with Xbox and how they're managed right now, their layoffs lately have been extremely disheartening. But I do appreciate their willingness to not only have cross-play, but bringing a lot of their exclusives to other platforms. I think that's something that I don't think Nintendo's ever going to do at this point, but PlayStation seems to be more open to it, and Xbox is leading the charge in that regard. So yeah, that's one that I do like, and I would like Nintendo to play nice with other developers. I would also like them to be a little bit less cryptic and walled garden-y about how they approach their games and game development and everything. I don't like that they are so like mysterious about what development team is creating their games. Like, just say it's the Mario Odyssey team making Donkey Kong Bonanza. It doesn't make any sense that they would keep that a secret. But yeah, I digress. Retro Librarian Gamer over on Patreon says, with Madden coming to Switch 2, do you think we will see the NHL franchise finally come back to Nintendo? I know you're a bit of a sports guy. Any love for hockey? So they've announced that Madden and EA Sports FC are coming to Switch 2. So that leaves us with, as I pull out my earbud, that leaves us with NHL, UFC, uh, college football. What else am I missing here? I mean, that's it for EA Sports that I can think of in terms of like their large franchises that are not coming to Switch. And then on 2K, we have NBA 2K coming to Switch, WWE 2K on Switch. And then we have over on Sony Santa Monica. Yeah, I was like, what am I missing? The MLB The Show franchise is already on Switch. So yeah, I think that it would be smart for them to bring NHL over to Switch. I think it's going to largely rely on how well Madden and how well EA Sports FC do on Switch 2. And candidly, I think that they are a lot more protected about like going to additional platforms for things like college football and NHL. And the reason for that, I think, is that they don't know how much they want to invest in making these ports because those don't sell quite as well as things like Madden and EA Sports FC. Those are their biggest sellers. So I think they're testing the waters with their highest sellers on Switch 2. And I also think they recognize that maybe the Nintendo audience isn't the biggest sporting audience, but the ones that are probably more likely to be kind of on the casual side. So they are probably more likely to buy Madden or more likely to buy EA Sports FC than they are NHL or UFC, right? Or even college football, even though that has been a huge success for them from what I understand. NHL, I would like to have it on Switch 2. I think it's going to be at least 1 year, maybe 2 years before it comes over. Emil Nathanson, I was just checking the time. Yeah, we're coming up on an hour here. We're going to go a little bit over an hour. Emil Nathanson on Discord says, Brian, you've been to Japan several times. Not sure how many, but I'm curious about how you navigate the foreign language there. Okay, so as you are listening to this episode, I am in Japan for the 5th time. Do you speak any Japanese? No, I do not. Read any Japanese? No, I do not. What's it like going to a place that isn't super English centric? So thankfully, the 2 cities that I've been to, Tokyo and Osaka, are rather English friendly. Like most service industry people, which are the majority of the people that I interact with when I go to those places, outside of like the developers that I'm visiting, they have a basic understanding of English at the very least, if not, a strong proficiency. So that has helped me out a lot. And it has changed quite a bit over the last 6 years. My first time going to Japan, I went to Tokyo for Game Freak for the Pokemon Sword and Shield cover story. The 2 things that have changed the most, I would say, in Japan, one is it was very cash centric when I was there in 2019. That has changed. I would say, I think COVID made it so they didn't want to handle as much cash. So a lot of places now accept credit cards, and especially foreign credit cards. Also, a lot more people I found speak English now. And I think that is a push when they started really pushing for tourism to be a big economic boost. But that said, there are times where it's like they don't have a Japanese menu. When I went there for Metaphor Refantasio, we went to a kind of a small kind of hole in the wall, but absolutely delicious restaurant with Katsuro Hashino and Shigenori Soejima, the director of the Persona series and Metaphor, and then the character designer of those same games. And a lot of the times what I do is I use Google Translate or Apple Translate. Like if you take a picture of something, you can actually translate into English the picture that you took. So like I did this actually when I was in Malmo, Sweden. It was funny because I went down to work out in my hotel basement, and there's not a lot of crossover between Swedish and and English. So I actually took a picture of the thing because I was in the gym and there was a wooden door. It looked very nice. And I was like, oh, I wonder if this is a sauna. But I went to go grab the handle. I was like, wait a sec, let me just look here. So I took a picture of it, and it said emergency exit, alarm will sound, building will evacuate. And I'm like, oh, well, I'm really glad I took that picture and checked, because I was about to brazenly open up that door and just walk on through, and I was about to evacuate my entire hotel in the process. So I'm glad that works. But when we went to this restaurant with the Metaphor team, they actually had a thing where it was a handwritten menu. So normally I could just take a picture of the menu if there's not an English menu. And normally, the first thing I say is English menu when I walk in, when they welcome me. And they usually have that just ready for me, because so many foreigners are coming to Tokyo and to Osaka that they have those ready and waiting. So, in the case of this handwritten menu, thankfully I had several fluent Japanese speakers with me. But typically, in the case of that, I will just kind of ask them what is good and what they recommend. And typically, they will have somebody who speaks a little bit of Japanese, and they can explain what, or I'm sorry, a little bit of English, and they can explain what it is. So, and a lot of the menus in Japan, if it's an English menu, they have pictures, so I can just point to it. Um, so that's a large way of navigating it. And then when I'm over there, I also will rely heavily. I always get a pocket Wi-Fi, because my international plan only gives me like 1 or 2 gigabytes of data a day, and it's super throttled, and I run out of it almost instantaneously. So I rent a Wi-Fi from the airport. They have like mobile vendors there that you can rent a Wi-Fi, and it's usually less than $10 a day. And I'll just use Google Maps or Apple Maps to get around, and it'll tell you when the train is coming, what train to take. And even in like areas that aren't super English friendly, I can usually find my way just by using either Google or Apple Maps, and it'll tell you exactly what platform to go to and everything. It is so helpful. Leverage technology any way you can is basically the moral of the story. And when Alex Van Aken and I were visiting the Street Fighter 6 team in Osaka, we took an Uber out to Universal Studios Japan, and we were leaving as the park was closing, and we couldn't get an Uber for whatever reason. Just Uber was impossible to get, and there were no taxis around, and the trains were stopping, or we couldn't. Something has happened with the trains. We couldn't get home, so we're like, how are we going to get back to like downtown Osaka where our hotel was? And it's like a 30-minute ride, so it's not anywhere near the downtown area. So we found a guy who was over by a hotel that was nearby, and we flagged him. He didn't speak a lick of English, so we were talking into our phones about like where to go and giving the address, and we were able to communicate that way. He would talk into it, we would read it, okay, and then we would talk, and then we would show him like where we needed to go, and that was extremely helpful for us. So yeah, just leverage technology. But there is a level of anxiety that comes with every time I go somewhere that English is not the first language. And a lot of places are centralized on English. Like they understand that tourism is a big deal. And for better and for worse, English is kind of like a global language at this point. But and through globalization, that has proliferated quite a bit. So it's been rare that I've gone in any of the travels that I've done, and it's like being unable to, like even in Malmo, Sweden, when I went in, they would greet me in Swedish, and the way I do it is they always greet me in their language, and I just say hello, and that instantly cues to them that I speak English. And then they have to kind of either whip out the English menu, or start talking in English, or find somebody who can. So that's kind of the way that I've navigated that. I when I go places like Mexico, I've been learning Spanish, and I try my best, and I've learned some key phrases in Japanese that have helped, and I would recommend that. But yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm ever going to be proficient in Japanese in the way that I would need to be if I went somewhere outside of like the major cities like Tokyo, Osaka, or Kyoto. Zach Benkel on Patreon, two-parter here. What are some of your favorite gaming OSTs, so soundtracks, Nintendo and otherwise? Also, how do you feel that your enjoyment of game soundtracks has changed with age? I personally feel like I just don't get as into soundtracks as I used to when I was a kid. Well, I think part of that might be nostalgia, right? I go back and I listen to soundtracks from my youth, and it instantly connects with me. The Sonic 3 and Knuckles soundtrack, the Super Mario World soundtrack, the Ocarina of Time soundtrack, the Final Fantasy X soundtrack. I don't know if anything, even if the music is of higher quality, like I know Celeste has an incredible soundtrack, it will never mean as much to me as like the Mario World soundtrack would. Um, the same could be said about like, I know Claire Obscure has an unbelievable soundtrack. I don't think it's ever going to mean as much to me as the Final Fantasy X soundtrack. Um, I named a lot of my favorite soundtracks there. Persona 5 is one that is incredible for me. Splatoon is awesome. And I think a lot of those they're due to the fact that one, they have incredible music, but two, I listen to them so much. Overwatch, I loved the music in that. Just the Persona series in general has awesome music. Meguro has Shoji Meguro, who is the composer, is just undefeated in my eyes in terms of like the music he puts out. Next part of this is and also how do I feel about my enjoyment evolving? I think that I've become more comfortable listening to gaming outside of the context of gaming, like listening to gaming soundtracks outside of the context of gaming. I growing up, I was always like, okay, well, I love this music, but it's not like I will ever listen to the music outside of the context of the game. Nowadays, I will sometimes just like fire up the Sonic Frontiers soundtrack, or even Sonic Forces actually had a surprisingly good soundtrack, despite that game not being my favorite. Um, Mario Odyssey has a great soundtrack. I will fire those up without having to have the game on. Persona 5, same thing. I have vinyl records of Turtles in Time and Persona series and all kinds of gaming related albums. So that's the type of thing that I've become more comfortable with listening to gaming soundtracks outside of the games themselves. Next question from Zach Benkel. Favorite Pokemon? We already answered that with Avery Moore's question, so Dragonite. And then number 3, assuming we get Pokemon Gen 10 announced at the next Pokemon Presents, so I'm assuming February 27th, what are your early predictions for features, region basis, and what the titles of the two games will be? Well, as we covered last week, this will be the 30th anniversary and the 10th generation of Pokemon. So the important thing there is I think that Ben Richland, my guest last week, he hit the nail on the head that it has to be something meaningful. And I think paying homage to the past would be a really cool thing. I know Ben was against the idea of Kanto. I think it would be cool to go back to Kanto with an all new story to celebrate the 10th or the 10th generation and the 30th anniversary of the franchise. I think they're going to pull out a lot of stops. I don't know what features they could do. The features that they've done in recent generations has just largely boiled down to, hey, you're going to have a more powerful Pokemon. Like that's kind of been, between Mega Evolutions and Z moves and terastallization and Dynamax/Gigantamaxing. I don't know. Like those gimmicks haven't really ever done too much for me. And I also think that in the case of some of the Mega Evolutions and almost all the terastallized Pokemon, they look really silly. So I hope that we get something that is a meaningful feature. I don't know what they could do, but it would be cool if there was some way they could pay homage to like the past generations of Pokemon. Maybe it's going to be like one of those all-in-one things, like you visit multiple regions. Maybe you start in one region and then you go to another one and then you go to another one. I don't know. Like maybe it would be cool if you could fly like on a Pokemon to another region. I don't know. I'm trying to think of something that would actually be appropriate for like a 10th generation and a 30th anniversary. But we'll see. But what are the titles of the next two games will be? That's the final part of this question. Man, I don't know. Like they announce these things and sometimes it's like, oh, that's perfectly obvious. Like Pokemon Sun and Moon, like that makes sense. But I'm never in the camp of being able to predict it. Sword and Shield, I never would have thought of that in a million years. I mean, we already did Alpha or Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. Otherwise, I would say Alpha and Omega, so that way they could play into like the time of like the beginning and the end. Oh man, I'm trying to think of like diametrically opposed terms, but I can't really come up with anything. Give me some more time to think on that. If I can think of something good in the 26 hours that I'm going to be in the air, and maybe I'll find some inspiration when I'm walking the streets of Tokyo. I will try and come back with a good answer to that. Like, what could possibly be the names of the next Pokemon? Um, that's all that I got from Discord and Patreon. We're going to jump to some of the responses that I got on Blue Sky, but we're going to do kind of rapid fire here because I do have to wrap up. I have a showing of Fantastic Four that I need to get to. So very excited for that. But Ben Bertoli, previous guest over here, just chimes in saying Majora's Mask is bad, actually. I would say that I agreed with this, not as a bad game, but it was just a bad Zelda game. But after playing it, I did an episode on like what it was like to play Majora's Mask in, I think it was 2024 is when I played it. No, it was 2023 because it was in the lead up to Tears of the Kingdom. Um, I got I developed an appreciation for it, even if it's not my favorite Zelda. It probably will never even crack like my top 5 Zelda games, but I got an appreciation for it when I plowed through it. But yeah, I'm not a big fan of the structure, even though it does enable some cool things and it forces you to do some other cool things. But yeah, Majora's Mask will never be my favorite Zelda game, but I'll defend it. I don't think it's a bad game. Todd Oxtra on Blue Sky. Are you surprised there doesn't seem to be much on the horizon for third-party and indie games on Switch 2? Do you think Call of Duty comes to Switch 2 this year? Do I think Call of Duty comes to Switch 2 this year? I don't. I think that we would have heard of it by now, and I don't think we have to this point, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, maybe they surprise us all and announce something next month that like it is coming to Switch 2, but I don't know. I think maybe they're going to take one more year to make sure that it works. From what I understand, Nintendo did not send out a lot of advance review or not review. They didn't send out any advanced review units, but a lot of advanced development units to its third-party partners. And I think that's to blame for a lot of these third-party games and indie games not being on Switch 2 quite yet. So I think that now that the Switch 2 is out in the wild and a lot of the dev kits have probably been distributed now, I think we will start seeing a lot more Switch 2 games, third-party titles coming out for the console. Brian T over on Blue Sky says, how do you think Nintendo will go about filling out their release calendar now that the well of Wii U ports has mostly dried up? 3DS ports, Wii, third-party games? I imagine they'll still want to release one-ish games a month, but that could be hard with increasing development times. I agree. I think that we saw them kind of largely pivot to doing they were developing a lot of games for the Switch 2. So I think that well is probably pretty well filled right now. But it does have the potential to dry up if development times continue increasing, which I believe in a recent call they did say they were keeping development times shorter because they needed to keep up with demand, and also like they don't want to have these just bloated development cycles. So that'll help. It continues to be the biggest boom for the Switch and Switch 2 that they now have all of their development teams focused on one console. I think that was one of the main reasons the Switch 1 was successful and had such an incredible library, is you didn't have developers having to decide between developing for the 3DS and developing for the Switch, right? Or developing the 3DS to developing for the Wii U. They could just say, we're developing for the Switch. Obviously that hurt some development studios like Game Freak, who weren't quite experienced enough to optimize their games for the Switch and like for those high resolution assets that were required for Switch games. But I think that will continue to help. I think that they will continue partnering with third parties. Like, we saw that Hades 2 is going to be a console exclusive to the Switch 2 at first. And I think that, Wii U ports, there's still a few that they could bring over, and that will buy them some time. Something like Yoshi's Woolly World, something like Star Fox Zero. If they did like Star Fox Zero Deluxe or something and actually fixed a lot of the problems, I think they could realistically do that. But yeah, 3DS ports, we've seen a few of those already. Bringing Wii games, partnering with those third parties. I think that's how they're going to fill out those things. And we're going to end on this. Ryan Gleason over on Blue Sky says, the greater world isn't ready for my actual Nintendo hot takes. So I'll just ask now, with the release of Donkey Kong Bonanza, what do you think about Nintendo spreading out their first-party Switch 2 releases rather than having a couple ready to go at launch? I think it is a double-edged sword. I think that a lot of people saw that Mario Kart World was the big Wii, the big Switch 2 release, and they said, "Okay, well, I can hold off." I know that I met up with a friend in New York when I was out there for Donkey Kong Bonanza, and he was like, "Yeah, Mario Kart World is not really my thing. Mario Kart in general is not really my thing. I'm going to hold off for Donkey Kong Bonanza." Or I had another friend that was like, yeah, Donkey Kong Bonanza and Mario Kart they're not really for me. I'm going to hold off until, later on when we get a new Pokemon game or maybe a new Zelda game. So like there is a double-edged nature of it, because I also think that there's good ideas there, because like, having both Donkey Kong Bonanza and Mario Kart World launch simultaneously, I think they could have cannibalized each other. I know for a fact that Nintendo really hates cannibalizing their own games. So that's why when, Breath of the Wild launched alongside the Switch, we didn't get Mario Odyssey. We didn't get Splatoon. We didn't get Mario Kart 8 Deluxe right on that same day. It was all spaced out, right? We got Snipper Clips. We got 1-2 Switch, but we didn't get another big AAA Nintendo first-party developed game until Mario Kart 8 Deluxe launched a month later. And then Splatoon 2 launched shortly after that. They like to have one game get the spotlight. And I think that's smart, honestly. Like, there are a lot of stupid things that I think Nintendo should maybe re-examine. I don't think this is one of them. I think that they are smart to space out their things, because we are so word of mouth focused now in society these days that I think that it makes sense to let the cultural zeitgeist focus on Mario Kart World. Then that kind of dies down, and then it's going to be focused on Donkey Kong Bonanza, and then that's going to start to die down. And then guess what we're going to get? We're probably going to get a Nintendo Direct very, very soon, if you haven't already gotten one as you're listening to this episode of All Things Nintendo. But with that, I mean, we didn't even get to any of the backlog questions that I had. But as I mentioned, the people who get in on the Patreon or the Discord server, you get priority access to these episodes. So that's why I only had a few from Blue Sky. But I know this was an unconventional show. I like to mix it up every once in a while with these solo shows. And it's also easier when I'm traveling to just kind of record this when it's convenient for me rather than having to book around a guest. But I do truly enjoy having the All Things Nintendo listenership on as essentially my guests for these solo Q&A episodes. So if you submitted a question, I really do appreciate you so much. I really don't take any listeners of this show and I don't take any of you for granted. And I especially appreciate anyone who participates or supports the show through the Patreon or the Discord server. Like you all are truly the only reason that I can continue justifying the time commitment and the stress that it takes to put this show together week after week. So really, really, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for your continued support, your continued participation. Every time I put out a call for questions, I'm always super concerned that there's not going to be enough questions to fill an episode, and I am always pleasantly surprised. So please continue giving me your questions, your rants, your hot takes. It doesn't even have to be when I put out a prompt. Like there is an entire channel on the Discord server for All Things Nintendo that is just a place, like a catch-all for all these questions that you want to submit. So please continue doing that. And thank you so much for continuing to support the show. And on that same note, thank you so much to everyone for listening. As you know, that aforementioned Patreon page and the associated Discord server are the best ways to get any questions or comments in. But you can also get in touch with me at brian@allthingsnintendo.com, or hit me up on Blue Sky, Instagram, or TikTok at Brian Pichet. And also follow the new All Things Nintendo podcast account over on Instagram. But for now, that is our show for this week. Thank you so much again for listening. Take care. We'll see you next time. Before we wrap up this episode of All Things Nintendo, I just want to give a special shout out to the $10 patrons of the show. Alex Stadnick, Andy Junkins, Ben Richland, Chaps My Ass, Derek Sigmund, Dusty Beeman, Ian T. Clark, Jason Thompson, Jawar Hello, Johnny Five, Jose Villalobos, Joshua DeProy, KC Radio Man, Cody Gibson, Creeper207, Pat Roberts, Paul at Drunk on Mako, Pratable, Rob McCann, Bobby Mac 265, Robert Sosa, Roberto Nieves, Roger Reichart, Russell Sayer, Smithy Poo, Zachary Pliggy, and Zek Three Swords Sama. Thank you so much for your continued contributions to keeping this show going week after week.